Hey everybody, how's it going? Wiley here with Ragnarok Meads. If you're watching this video, you're probably interested in the concept of an Oktoberfest styled Braggot. We'll be talking about that plus a bunch of extra details. This video in particular will be focusing on the comparisons of oak-aged, non-oak aged, CO2, non-CO2, and then of course different types of yeast used in the process. So if you're a brewer or a homemaker of intermediate to advanced level, I think you'll find at least a little something in here interesting and worthwhile. I know I did. Well, I mean, I made the video, so of course I did. Tim, write terrible lines for me. Should have never let you marry my sister. You're not worth her. Without further ado, welcome to Ragnarok. Tim. So as I said, this is a Braggot styled mead, so let's go ahead and get started with the grain bill, which is going to be a 60% Pilsner and 40% Munich, which is supposed to mimic the German-styled Oktoberfest beers with the Pilsner and the Munich. And the only adjunct, of course, is going to be our honey, which is a wildflower honey. And I used half as much as normal because I really wanted to reduce the amount of sweetness involved in this and make it primarily a very light and easily drinkable alcohol. This is going to be the lightest one I've ever made. Absolutely. Fucking hate mosquitoes. And the only additive that I have in it, other than the barley, water, yeast, honey, I mean really the four primary ingredients to a Braggot, the only thing added to it is going to be walnuts, and that was added during the grist, so during the malting and during the boiling. That was added at the very primary phase, so the grist. So the ABV on this one is going to be a 3.8. This is the lowest one that I've made so far, and it does retain a bit of bubbles, but we'll get to that one in a minute. We'll get to the CO2. Obviously, I have that sitting here. We'll talk about that. The yeast that we used for this one is going to be a monk yeast, and I did that to kind of profile the whole idea of 793, which is 793 AD, and Lindisfarne when the Vikings arrived on Lindisfarne and attacked it. So I tried to emulate it with a little bit of monk yeast for this batch, and then the next one, and then the last one that I'm doing that's not finished yet, that should be done around January 18th. That one's going to be using a Berlin yeast, and we'll be taking a look at that one when that one's finished too, in the same fashion that we're doing these ones, flat and CO2. Filtration, I used 1.5 to a 2.5 micron filtration system. I filtered it with a greater filtration system at first, a few times to kind of get all the large chunks, and then I did a 1.5 to 2.5 microns. I did my mash at 155 to 160 for an hour, and of course I had to keep the flames going on it because it's January and it's freaking cold, so I had to keep the flame going on it the whole time, which made it difficult, but it was doable. And then the boiling process, about an hour and a half, 1 month for racking, 1 month for oak aging if you're oak aging, for me, if I'm oak aging, and 9 days approximately for the fermentation process on this one. And we're not getting a hell of a lot out of this simply because there's no CO2, there's no hops, there's no etching, there's not a lot of elements infused into this to participate in the CO2 production, but this one clearly has a very main component, which is full-on CO2 injected into it and infused into it. There's a lot of methods to get CO2. I will also produce a video on that, which is quite extensive. I had to look over many platforms to find as many different varieties of techniques involved, and it's actually far more complicated than most people would think. So without further ado, a flat CO2. We're at 11 psi, and it's still, even though it doesn't really quite seem like it, there is still carbonation infused into this one, even though it doesn't quite give that voluptuous foamy top that most beer drinkers do like. But as you can see, there are particulates and bubbles of CO2 gas trapped inside, and it does have a bit of an effervescence to it. So it's more of a champagne type of feel to it with this one. Mouthfeel. Ooh. God, I hate that word. Sorry, almost threw up a little bit. Anyway, cheers. It's nice. It's clean. It's a very light body. It's mostly on the back of the tongue. It goes down real easy, and there's very little aftertaste to it. So it's extremely drinkable. It's very light, super non-aggressive. And then the flat. It's really about the same, except that there's just no bite from the CO2, honestly. It just lacks that effervescence to it. As far as the other tastes and qualities to it, there's no bitterness in this. Like I said, it's honey, wildflower honey, Pilsner, Munich, walnuts. So super non-offensive flavors, really nice, really rounded. If anything, I think the walnuts kind of give it a nice warm, earthy type of feel to it. Very nice and light and delicate. And I don't think most people would understand what that was until you say that there is actually walnut in it. But it's really nice and really clean. Very light on the honey and very light on the walnuts too. But again, I made it perfectly so it's drinkable at mass quantities at a low ABV, and I made it for that purpose. So I think pretty much achieved, other than not having the foam that I wish I could have in it. So okay, so here we are with the second batch, which is going to be a 6.6 ABV, and it's oak aged in comparison to the last one. They both use the same yeast. We're still using monk styled yeast, so we're still on the exact same drink essentially, except that the first one being a 3.8 ABV, this one's a 6.6. The first one was non-oak aged, and this one is oak aged. So yeah, as you can see, it does come out a little bit nicer compared to the 3.8. The 6.6 really does kind of maintain the foam structure a little bit better. I like that. It adds a nice, perfect little fizziness to it. That's really nice. It doesn't maintain very well because there's no hops, and it doesn't have the necessary proteins to do so. There's a lot of elements missing to help stabilize, keep, and maintain that foam structure, which is something we could discuss in a later video. But for right now, the elements that are missing are, obviously they're more on the beer side of the production. Mead itself is not going to maintain CO2 very well. Fuck, it's a little cold out. As you can see, I got this going. Let's see. CO2. It actually kind of gives it a little fuller of a mouthfeel. And like I said, I built this primarily to be drinkable, and I wanted to put it on CO2, and I had planned on doing that, but I wanted to run it through the flat versus CO2 test anyway, because most of my drinks aren't on CO2 and they're all flat. But the difference is that I have a much more deep profile and so many more characteristics added to all my other meads that it doesn't need carbonation. None of them need it. This one does, because I built it purposely for being a Stein drink. So it has a really nice light astringency to it because of the tannins added, and of course tannins being a derivative of the process for tanning leather and using different materials to tan leather. So you get these dark materials used for your drinks, the oak, which adds that flavor to it and adds that astringency. And I think when you add it to when you add CO2 to that, it definitely bumps it up an extra level too with those tannins. So I do recommend the oak aging and the CO2 when it comes to something really light like this type of mead here. The body, again, it's very similar, very comparable to the first one, even though that there's oak added to it. The body itself is still very light and very thin. I only added 1 cup of medium dark oak to it. Like, the darkness of it was a medium oak. 1 cup for 1 month, and that did really well for this. Normally I'd probably do a little bit more for other certain types of drinks, just to kind of give it that nice robust barrel flavor, but because this is so light, I didn't want it overpowered by the oak. So that's something you have to kind of calculate and monitor with your own recipes, I think, is to kind of come to your own conclusion that way. But I feel like that this worked out perfect for it. It still has a bit of that CO2 left in it. It's not going away too quickly, which is nice. It didn't have a nice thick foamy head on it, but it's maintaining that effervescence in it still. I think that 6.6 is definitely holding in the CO2 molecules a lot better than that 3.8 for sure. Okay, so here we are with the final round. This one came out to be a 4.2 and utilizes a Berlin yeast. So we're gonna try to evaluate the difference between the monk versus the Berlin yeast on this one specifically. There's no oak aging on this one, so we don't have to worry about any astringencies or any acidities or anything like that, or even a lot of tannins interfering with any of the coloration or the taste. So this is more or less purely on the basis of which yeast is going to taste a little bit better, or what the differences are, if at all, that we can tell. So let's go ahead and get started with, well, the color, first of all. Still very nice, very pale. I think the aroma is actually a little sweeter on this one. And I feel like that there's just slightly more body on it compared to the monk yeast. Not bad. Some bubbles. Yeah, you get that nice pucker. I get it back here in the jowls. That's good. I feel like the sweetness comes through better with the Berlin yeast compared to the monk yeast. The monk yeast had more of a, I think, a tart and almost kind of a sour astringency to it. Greater so in comparison to the Berlin yeast, which has a smoother, fuller, kind of a sweet body to it. Clean. Bubbles. Yeah, it's, I think for me it's hands down going to be Berlin yeast used with oak aging and CO2. This one I created purposely for the sole purpose of using CO2 and again, no hops, so you're not going to get that foaminess, that hydrophobicity that you would typically get with most beers, because the hops have more of those protein strands and those polypeptides that really combine and utilize that foam structure. So I think the honey comes through better on it for sure. And I used all the same honey on it. It's not from the same exact batch of mash, so I had to cook 3 different ones, and that could contribute, I think, a larger amount to some of the flavor differences. But again, I think oak aging definitely adds a really excellent quality, and you have to watch how much you use and how long you use it for, because it will soak in and it will overpower your drink if you're not using a strong enough flavors and profiles, especially if you're using kind of a melomel or a sizer or something of that nature, where it just solely depends on that fruity sweetness. You don't want to add too much oak, if at all. You want it to ride solely on those flavors. But if you're using a Braggot, I highly recommend oak aging. It's excellent. And again, so if you have any questions that I didn't cover or any criticisms, feel free to go ahead and comment. It's fine. I'd like to know what your opinion is as far as Braggots go, and oak aging and different types of yeast, everything that we've talked about in here. That'd be awesome. I'd like to hear from you. I'd like to answer whatever questions I possibly can with whatever knowledge I do happen to have. Yeah. I'll try to make sure my puns from now on aren't too mediocre. Yeah. Tim, you told me it was funny yesterday. Why would... Tim's fired. Okay. Anyway, sorry. Talking about nuts. We're gonna quaff the fuck out of this beer right now. Why are you being a dick? It's stinky. Why did that happen? It's about a cup of oak for about a month, a medium oak with 1 cup for 1 month, and that works out pretty well, I think. A nice healthy pour. Hydrophobicity. It's cold. I should just keep drinking, right? God, I like that one. Come to daddy. Testing microphone without the muff. It is shaved. It is fresh. Let's see. Biscuits, sausage, pancakes, blueberry pancakes, massage oil for the pancakes. What else do they keep that in? Oh man, that's terrible. Okay, one more time. God. Shit. I hate it. It's terrible. You're fired. You're fired, Tim. Especially you. You told me it was fucking funny yesterday. Threw me off my game. You threw me off my fucking game, Tim.